Hello, hello, beautiful people. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am your host. I'm happy to be here. I have exciting news for you. I have so much to tell you. I don't even know where to begin. I guess where I'm feeling called to begin is just taking a moment to acknowledge how much is happening in the world right now. Does it not feel like the world is getting more and more intense at any given moment? And I think it is very relevant that the subject of today's podcast is about control. I did a whole episode on control in terms of when things are happening outside of you that you can't control. I highly recommend you go check that out. I forget what episode it is, but if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see it. This episode is a little bit different on my take on control, but it's just a lot. There's a lot going on, and I think it's very easy for us to get really overwhelmed and feel really responsible. And so this is my gentle reminder to you that you are allowed to take care of yourself. You're allowed to slow it down. You're allowed to manage your anxiety in a way that doesn't burn you out. We need you to be full and nourished. That is really important right now. So please do what you can, okay? So I got this question on Instagram last week, and I was going to answer it on Instagram stories, but I realized that I just have so much to say about it. And so here's the question. Hi, Thais. Love your podcast. I'm currently catching up on the Days of Worth. Oh, hello. By the way, did you all love the 10 Days of Worth? That was such an epic series. I still am like in awe at how that series came together. If you did not check it out, again, scroll down wherever you're listening to your podcast because that 10 Days of War series is really good. Anyway, back to the question. I have injuries due to a drunk driver hitting me back in October 2018. I have always done things on my own time and pace. Whatever I woke up to and wanted to do, I did it. My injuries and recovery have taken a huge toll on me, realizing I have no power or control over what has and is happening to me. What advice do you have for someone who has never experienced being out of control in this way? I'm almost certain I have anxiety and depression due to this, and I have never had problems handling stress either. Such a good question. I have so much to say on it. Let's do the little intro blurb, and then we're going to get into it. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Thais Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. Oh, but wait, before we get into this question, there's something that I really want to talk about because I'm really excited about this. Worthiness season is still here, peoples. I know that doors closed last week for my 5-month signature group program, Worthy Women Rise. I totally get that, but I extended Worthiness season one more week. That's till this week because I decided to relaunch my Worthy Women Rise mini digital course and turn it into a live version. What does all of that mean? So I currently have on my website a Worthy Women Rise Mini, which is a 4-module digital course where I basically took the best concepts of my 5-month program and put it into this really dense, rich program. 4 modules. I decided, instead of just letting it live on my website, I wanted to host another round of live version of this digital course. I haven't done this since 2018. I have no intentions of doing it again. But basically, you get to go through those 4 modules with me and other group of women in a Facebook group, a private Facebook group just for us, where as the modules drop, we get to talk about it, we get to explore it, we get to unpack it. And with this live version, I'm also going to be offering weekly group coaching. So this is where I get to support you internalize these topics in a very specific way due to your lived experience. So that's what Worthy Women Rise Mini Live is all about. It's a 5-week experience, a condensed version, a super jammed version of the 5-month program that I lead twice a year. That's why it's called Mini. Not Mini because the content is small. By no means is the content small. This content is so big and rich and juicy. You're going to get all of that, but just in a really condensed form of 4 weeks, 4 modules, 5 weeks. Okay. So if you're interested in learning more about Worthy Women Rise Mini, you can go to thaissky.com/WWR. That's ThaisSky.com/WWR. You can also go to the show notes. Really looking forward to this. Doors close this Friday. It's a really short enrollment period. Doors close this Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific. So if you're tuning into this at any point this week and you're interested in this program, go check it out, going to that link. And then that digital course lives on my website indefinitely. So if you're listening to this after Friday, March 6th, and you're interested in this course, you can go to that link, ThaisSky.com/WWR, and you'll get the mini digital course. It won't be with the live aspects. It won't be with the live group coaching call or the intimate Facebook group where you get access to me and other women in the journey. That is limited to right now. Okay, so let's start talking about this question that I received. I love this question for a variety of reasons. One, I have been experiencing some physical issues for the past 2 years, but really this past year, since my birthday of last year, my entire 30s, honestly, has been plagued with some physical stuff that's been really frustrating, because similarly to what this person's question is eliciting, is getting at, is a real deep sense of anxiety around this thing that's happening that we really can't do much about. And so much of our pain, right, comes from resisting what is and having to adjust our lives based on what is here. So much of my life has meant this past year of really pouring a lot of money into my personal health, which has been really frustrating because I've been wanting to use that money elsewhere. I've been wanting to travel, do these things. I've had to really slow it down. I've had to infuse my life with certain metrics of how I want my day to day to go. That is really frustrating. I didn't want to do that, and I resisted it for a long time, which only exacerbated the pain. And this is the thing when something happens to us, particularly in our body, is that it can feel really, really unfair. And we get so caught up in that unfairness that it feels hard to take anything else in. And so what I always recommend to start is to really name that it doesn't feel fair and that there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of ambivalence to the care. Ambivalence is one of my favorite words of all times because it really speaks to this human condition where we want something, but we also don't want it. We want something, but we're also afraid of it. There's a half of us that is really excited about something and half of us that isn't. And when it comes to taking care of ourselves, there is typically ambivalence. There is usually half of us, a part of us, that really wants to take care of ourselves and want to love ourselves and want to accept ourselves. And then there's a part of us that really resists that because loving ourselves may mean that we have to admit that we failed or that this really happened. And that can be really hard. So there's the two levels, right? There's both accepting that something happened and then accepting the consequence of what that something that happened is. There is both, I now have this thing happening in my body and I have to accept that. And then I have to accept it to the extent that I'm taking care of it. And that means, acknowledging the fact that my life is different now and that we have to now navigate life differently. I want to go on a slight tangent because I think it might be relevant. And then I'm going to loop it all back around to this question. But this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I've been processing a lot, and I want to open the door a little bit and share with you a really intimate process that I've been going through because I think it relates to control. And control and the worthiness wound is never really far away from each other. And so it's all going to tie back around. But I come from a childhood where being abandoned was one of my core wounds, and the fear of abandonment kind of led into the fear of being rejected and not wanting to be rejected, which I think is a very common human experience of not wanting to be rejected, not wanting to be left. But for me particularly, there's a real desire to not be in conflict, to not really state what I think, to not ask questions, to not be difficult because I don't want that rejection. And so that has meant that I've built a lot of friendships that weren't really authentic, that weren't grounded in what's true for me because I complied and I said yes and I agreed to things I didn't want to agree to because I didn't want to jeopardize the friendship. So there's a pattern in my life of, being rejected, being devastated, and then feeling like this definitively proves that I cannot be authentic in my relationships, but then wanting to be authentic, being afraid to be authentic, and then being rejected, and then that's proof that I shouldn't be authentic, right? So there's this pattern in my life. And what's interesting is that in my own therapy, my therapist has been really helping me slow it down and come to this idea of what if you could make sense of things together? What if you didn't have to make sense of your entire lived experience by yourself? What if all of our, like most of our lives is spent in relationship to other? What would it look like to not have to make sense of all of life by yourself, but actually trust that the relationship can handle us making sense of things together? And this is something I've actually been infusing in a lot of my one-on-one work, because I've seen that this is not just a me experience, but very much an us experience, where so many of us were kind of left to our own devices as a child, left to make sense of our big feelings and our big experiences by ourselves. And there's a variety of reasons and ways that this could have developed. For me personally, I moved internationally a lot before the age of 7, and I wasn't really supported in those moves. My caretakers didn't help make sense of those moves for me. They were really doing the best they could, but they were busy trying to figure out so many other things that I was left with a lot of really big feelings by myself. And so I learned to not to trust myself, to depend only on myself in terms of making sense of things. Okay, so when that loops back into relationship is that when something happens in a relationship that doesn't feel good, when I sense a rejection, even if it's not a rejection or that person didn't mean for it to be a rejection, if I perceive it as a rejection, I tend to shut it out and act as if it were a rejection, right? Act as if what was happening was a rejection. And so this idea of like, what would it look like to make sense of things together? What would it look like to not then have to come to this conclusion and react on this conclusion by myself means getting into more complex questions and conversations of actually asking the person, hey, you did this and I made it mean, that you're rejecting me. And I'm curious if that's what you meant or if you meant something else. And while that sounds really beautiful and that sounds really nice, and I've been working so hard to get to that place of complexity, I also have to name that one of my biggest fears is that by naming my experience and sharing it with somebody else, they will ultimately make the entire experience be about them, and I will be lost in the other. Which is also something that happened for me in my childhood. My mom has a very strong personality. There's a lot of things that I try to get her attention, and every time I did, she would kind of make it be about her, right? So there's that both and. I have to make sense of this by myself because one, no one taught me how to make sense of it together. And two, if I do make sense of it together with somebody else, there's that fear that I am going to be consumed. Okay. So all of this came to head when I realized that there was a moment where I had a really beautiful interaction with a friend. I left that interaction feeling really grateful for her. Really, really grateful for the beautiful space that she held for me and this beautiful relationship that we're building as friends. Just feeling really grateful and wanting to text her. And so I composed this text that said, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for this beautiful time together, blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't send it. And I remember sitting there looking at my phone thinking, do I send this or not? And the way my mind went was I shouldn't send it because she's not going to respond right away. She's not, she didn't feel the way I do. She's not grateful. She's not blah, blah, blah. And if I send this, she's probably not going to respond. And so I don't want to put myself out there and be rejected. By doing that, this is the whole crux of this whole story. By doing that, though, by assuming her rejection, I am now acting from a rejected place, which means I am now acting as if she rejected me. It's wild how that works, right? By assuming that she's going to reject me and not sending that text, I am now acting as if she rejected me. And so the pattern then keeps playing out where now I have to hold that she rejected me all by myself. I put on her that she's the rejector, which is a comfortable position for me as like the person who is rejected. And now I'm solidified on why I shouldn't trust other people and why I should not try to make sense of things with other people. And I should instead be left to my own devices, make sense of things by myself. Isn't that wild how we do that? This whole narrative that happened in my head, I know this is subtle, y'all. I know this is subtle, but listen, this assumption that I made led to a whole series of events that did not happen because she didn't reject me. She didn't have an opportunity to reject me. In fact, I didn't let her have her own experience at all. I, in that sense, was attempting to control her. control her, manipulate her by assuming what she was going to say and do. Instead of sending that message, what if she did actually reject me, right? Like, what if I sent the text and she never responded? Then I would feel rejection, sure. But then I would also have to deal with it. I would have to talk to her about it. I would have to figure it out with her or with myself and figure out why I was rejected. I would then have to deal with my fear of rejection. But by not taking action, by not texting her, I don't have to deal with my rejection because I didn't quote unquote do anything. And in this subtle way is how these patterns keep playing out. So what happened? I ended up sending her the message. She responded shortly after with similar notes of gratitude. And that was it. That was it. And later on, I shared with her the whole process that I went through, and she laughed, and I got, continued to explore this because this is a deep pattern in my life. But I think it's a pattern for many of us of the ways that we attempt to not actually feel our feelings by assuming what's going to happen. This is similar to, for example, like ghosting someone instead of breaking up with them face to face. What happens when we do that is that we then don't have to deal with the consequence of their feelings. We then get to make a story about how they're going to react and then act from that place by ghosting them and then not having to look at our own feelings around what we just did because now we get to just move on. There's so many ways that we pretend that we don't feel how we feel or that we try to deny our feelings because feelings are hard. Feelings are so hard to navigate by ourselves. By the way, obviously, feelings is a module in Worthy Women Rise Mini because navigating our feelings is such a core, necessary tool that we are not taught. Most of us are not taught how to navigate our feelings. Okay. You can go check that out, ThaisSky.com/WWR. So when it comes to this question, right, I mean, she's talking about something that's much more physical. It has to do with her physical body and feeling out of control with her physical body. But that sense of feeling out of control is connected to so many things. And what's really happening, right, is that there's an illusion of control, that there's an illusion that if we do certain things, assume certain things, act certain ways, then we will be in control. We will have autonomy. We'll get to decide how to live our best lives. But the fact of the matter is, so much is outside of our control. So much. What happens tomorrow is outside of our control. How other people react is outside of our control. So much of how we interpret things is outside of our control. So yes, we need to really come face to face with this idea that the human experience wants to control things. The human experience tries to make meaning out of things in order to gain a certain level of control. It's make the unknown known so that we can feel comfortable. And this is biological and we need this. And there's nothing bad about this. This is just a part of how the human brain experiences things. So that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, these types of experiences like illnesses, disease, accidents, and also this deep inner work that I'm doing, all of it affords us the opportunity to face things differently because we are now viscerally aware of how much we've been trying to control what we can't control. And so you can resist it, and that's valid, and that, may be necessary for a while, but at a certain point, we have to stop resisting and stop looking at where we have falsely placed our sense of control and instead cultivate an internal locus of control, an internal sense of control. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we remove the need for the external world to be a certain way, just like I need to remove the hook on other people to not reject me, right? And instead, see if we can bring that attention inward of what I can control in this moment is how I attune to myself. And what I can control in this moment is the care that I place in my inner world. So why do we have anxiety and depression when things happen that is outside of our control? Well, one, we're human, we're allowed to have responses. But if we start to look at anxiety and depression and what the mechanisms of anxiety and depression is, a lot of that is resistance to accepting the world and the way things are. And there's so much there around what it would mean to accept the way things are. Like if we were to accept that this happened, then what? Then what? We have to accept that there are so many things that is out of our control. We have to accept that, that life is in many ways chaotic. And that can be really scary for us. The reason why so much of us need control in our lives is because we come from a really chaotic background and we weren't given the structure and the safety we needed to feel in control of ourselves. And so now we create these false sense of controls outside of ourselves in order to maintain a sense of safety. That anxiety, that depression, that's communication. That is telling you that there are big feelings underneath the surface that you are bottling down, that you are pushing down because it's too hard to look at. And so, there's so much compassion for our inability to accept things the way they are. Trust me, I've been dealing with stuff with my health for so long now, and it is so frustrating. And there's so much anxiety there because I'm afraid of what's going to happen, right? That's a lot of that anxiety as well, is like fear of the future, fear of what's going to happen. That is very pervasive right now. What's going to happen with the coronavirus? What's going to happen in the presidential election? Like there's so much fear right now of what's going to happen. That anxiety can take us into places that just keep going and doesn't have a resolve. And ultimately what we have to do is slow it down and bring ourselves to what matters. We have to be gentle with ourselves. We have to look at, what we can do to be in our own care, to care for ourselves, to care for the body that we have right here, right now, even in the form that it is not acceptable to us. How can we be in care of it? So my loves, for all of you who are struggling with a question similar to this, let me just say this is it. This is the invitation that you've actually been waiting for. I know that it doesn't come in the package that you wanted it to, but this is your opportunity to grow so deeply in your own truth that you are so much more than anything that happens to you. The trauma of the accident, the trauma of physical chronic stuff is real and it needs to be attended to. The anxiety and depression is real and needs to be attended to. And at the end of the day, we get to use these really hard things to deepen into ourselves, to develop a secure sense of self that doesn't require control and manipulation. Every time I face my fear of rejection and I do things anyway, or I name that fear, or I take actions despite the assumptions, I am saying to myself, I don't need to assume the future because I am safe now. And no matter what happens in the future, I'll be able to handle it because I am fierce. I've never let myself down. I will not let myself down. And I get to trust that. I get to lean on that. You have to have your own back, and you do have your own back. Simply by reaching out to me, asking this question, it sounds like you are already in that process of doing this healing work. Just keep going. Notice the resistance. Love and care to the places within you that is scared of what it would mean for you to accept what is here. And know that control is not power. Control is not real power. Control is a way that we attempt to deal with life. It's a compensatory mechanism. It's a defense strategy from our wounded place. People who are the most obsessed over control, obsessed over power, you'll see, you see them in the world. They're actually deeply, deeply, deeply wounded humans. Control is not real power. Real power is flexibility. Real power is our ability to go inward. Real power is our ability to question and respond and go inward again and again and again. Okay, so I hope that this has supported you all. I hope that my story has resonated. I know that it's subtle work, but it's been so powerful for me to notice this pattern in my life. It's so exciting when you're doing really big inner work. And I've also noticed in doing really big inner work that you get to a place where you know what you're doing. You can notice the pattern, but you can't change it yet. You know what I'm saying? Like you notice it feels incongruent to keep playing out the pattern. You notice the pattern over and over again, and yet you can't seem to change it. That middle place is really, really hard because we want to change, and yet we can't seem to do it because the feelings aren't going with it. And that is, again, the invitation, the opportunity. This is a reminder to myself that things are allowed to take time. Our body does not have the same time mechanism as our minds. Our emotions, our trauma, our healing is allowed to take time. Our body's healing is allowed to take time. Our mind is not this end all be all. The mind is not the one all power being, right? Like, we got to be in congruency with our body and our heart and our mind. All of these three things must come together. I don't like the mind I don't like thinking of the mind as like a dictator, but like, honestly, that's kind of what our culture has led us to believe, that the power lies in the mind, when really the power lies in integrating all three and letting all three things be balanced in our lives. And so giving yourself space to rest, giving your body space to heal is so important. It's allowed to take time. All right, y'all. I hope that this resonated with you. If you love it, share it. Connect with me on Instagram at I am Thais Sky. And if you're interested in Worthy Women Rise mini live, doors close this Friday, go to thaissky.com/WWR. I will talk to you all next week. Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.